Hi all, Marky with the Exiles. So you do you, not your system. Okay, so where does this come from? Well, in a recent video, I was talking about being close to your source, and I used a phrase that several people picked up on, where I said that I do me inspired by Fiore. So I decided to do a quick video on it. Now, the funny thing is actually that when I was writing some notes for this, because I tend to waffle on, someone else this week actually has published an article of something very similar about personal styles within HEMA. So it's kind of taken the wind out of my sails a little bit, but I've already written some notes and I still wanted to get something out. So let's explore this. So where is the line between staying true to system and being yourself? Okay, and as always, I'm going to break this down into two sections. Okay, so firstly, we'll talk about being yourself. And secondly, we'll talk about being true to your system of study. And we'll talk briefly about if you study multiple systems. So the first bit is really easy. You're an individual, with your own strengths, your own weaknesses, your own traits. And I've said before that a bad instructor tries to create martial clones. And in my view, this is fundamentally wrong. It's wrong to try and make everybody robotically the same. And lots of martial arts instructors do this. Do it exactly how I do it. Don't put your foot there because that's not what I do, etc., etc. Now, most of us study one system, and we study it potentially for different reasons, but very few of us study our system for its actual use, okay, such as combat or dueling. Unlike Fiore, I don't go off and fight alone with sharps and minimal armour to prove my worth as a martial arts instructor, which is a shame. But seriously, very few of us can claim to be truly performing our system as intended. Also, none of us can really say that we're doing the system either. Fiore is not my teacher. Of course, it's my never-ending aim to get as close as I possibly can to his works, but more so, he's not here telling me how to do it, and I'm also not Fiore, so I'm obviously, of course, not going to be doing the system as he would have done it. It was his system, he developed it, it worked for him, he taught other people how to do it, but I have none of those things. But as I say, it's my goal to get as close to the martial works of Fiore, where respected peers, etc., can feed back on me and say, yeah, I think you're getting pretty close, I think you're onto something, or indeed, if Fiore were to pop back and say, hey, you know what, you're pretty close. That's my goal, and that's the goal of what we do in the Exiles. We're always trying to get martially as close to the works of Fiore, and of course that is a never-ending mission statement, if you like. But of course, in conversation, I do just say I do Fiore. But going back to the point I made at the beginning, and indeed from the other video, I don't really do Fiore. I just do me and my skills, my strengths, inspired by Fiore. Now, let's go back to you. So it's the same for you, how you move, react, and all the rest of it. You're always doing you. And the students of your chosen fencing master, they were always doing them as well. And I think it's entirely correct, inevitable, totally necessary and super important that your chosen system of study, or indeed systems of study, and we'll get to that, are the basis and the framework for your own skill set and how that skill set develops. That's all it can be. That's all it would have been with the master as your teacher. But there is a limit if you're a purist anyways. So with part two, how do we be ourselves but still to stay true to our system? So there is absolutely a fine line between working to your traits and staying true to your system. Now, sadly, there are a lot of people who think that they are representing the works of Fiore through their own skill set, but sadly they're not. Okay, and the reason why I can say this is because there are some very obvious fundamental principles within the system. And if those aren't being followed, then in my view, you're not staying true to the system. There's still a lot that's open to debate, and obviously that's part of the journey and the fun that I get out of HEMA, and the reason why I do this is because that journey never stops, and I'm always trying to work out the intricacies and what did he actually mean when he said this, and is there a follow-on, and so on and so forth. That's the excitement that I get from doing a system like Fiore. But as I say, if you look hard enough, and there are some fundamental principles that are absolutely true throughout the system, some less obvious and some still open to debate, as I say, but it's about following the principles as best we understand them, and of course that's open to interpretation, but it's about the principles, the application and the outcome. So I'm not going to go into lots of principles, but what I do personally is I have a list of 5 rules. So when I'm trying to reconcile my skill set, my traits, how I work and how I fight, how do I reconcile that with being true to the works of Fiores? So I have 5 rules for this, okay? So rule number 1 is that principle must always be followed, okay? So as a basic example, if Fiore only deals, and this is a basic example, but if Fiore only dealt with a low thrust in a certain way, then I must always deal with that thrust in the same way that he tells me that I should. If I'm going outside of that, then arguably I'm not being true to the system, unless he implies it or says that you can deal with that thrust in another way. Okay, so again, absolutely open to interpretation, but that's always the way that I challenge myself first. Am I sticking to the multiple principles that are demonstrated within the manuscript? Okay, if there is any natural preference there, then I have to rely on the other rules that I have. Okay, so number 2, am I following the same setup? Okay, so if a certain play is accessed from a specific position, then I should access those plays from that same position. And this is where Fiore gets a bit complicated, because there are often many ways to access a play. So here again, when challenging myself, we have to rely on our other rules, okay? So rule number 3 is that the outcome must be the same or similar. So here, an example would be, let's say an elbow push to close, okay? We aim to satisfy rule 1 and rule 2, but if we cannot satisfy either one of those rules because of natural preference, then the outcome must be the same. So an extreme example, to make a point, let's say you can't use your left hand. Let's say you've done a one-handed cover and you can't use your left hand to push at the elbow. Okay, let's say you have mobility issues with your left hand. Then to make the outcome the same, the outcome of the action the same, then perhaps instead of using my hand to push, I use my forearm, just as a random example. As long as the outcome is the same and we're trying to satisfy rule 1, 2 and 3, then to me, you're allowing natural preference, but you're also staying true to your system. Okay, rule number 4 is, can you access the follow-on or the failure options? So Fiore gives us lots of these. Some are really easy to spot, like the second play of Abbracciari, for example. Okay, if you're trying for the first play and their arm bends, you come over the top of that arm and you start to access the second play. Okay, that's a follow-on action or a failure option. If I have a natural preference for performing the first play of Abbracciari, as long as I can comfortably sit within rule 1, 2 and 3 and indeed access my failure options, so rule number 4, and the outcome is the same, then for me, I'm still allowing natural preference, but I'm staying true to my system. So lastly, rule number 5, okay, and this is by far the most subjective, all right? So am I trying to follow the characteristics and the sentiments of the system? So a good example would be understanding when would Fiore want to close, or when would he want to make a one-handed cover, or when he talks about knocking out someone's teeth with an action, would I be able to apply the right level of intent to achieve this? Okay, so am I moving, operating with the right sentiment, with what I believe to be the right approach to the system? And the idea of those 5 rules is that if I'm allowing, as I say, any natural freedom to come in, am I trying to still satisfy those 5 rules? Okay, and there I believe that we have a basic framework. If I'm trying to stay within the parameters of those rules, I have a basic framework for that natural preference and stay true to system. And of course, as I keep saying, it's all subjective, and that's kind of part of the fun. So the 5 rules: principles are always observed where possible. The setup and execution is as shown or described or intimated. Number 3, the outcome is the same as intended, described or implied. Number 4, you can access the follow-on or failure options that are shown, especially with a system like Fiore's works. And number 5, that you are within the characteristics of the system. So these rules aren't infallible, and of course I'm oversimplifying, but they're a framework which we can carefully allow that essential traits of the individual to come out in, and so they can still operate within the system. And of course, all of this is backed up with good instruction, because some ideas are stupider than others. So that's part number two. Okay, that's staying true to system with that natural preference coming through. Lastly, there's a different angle to all of this, and that's someone who is creating a wholly personal system based on one or multiple sources. Now, to be clear, I'm talking about someone using one or more sources as inspiration for their own personal system. Is this possible? The answer is yes, absolutely. I do think it's possible with enough depth of knowledge and understanding, but my main question would be, to what end? I said at the very beginning, none of us are really applying our systems as they were intended. We're not arguing over land and going to have a judicial tourney to decide who gets that land. Okay, we're not trying to maim and kill each other on the streets and so on and so forth. So my question would be, if you're creating your own personal system, to what end? If it's to enter into competitions and stuff, then yeah, fine, because you can prove the success of your chosen hybrid, or however you've personally chosen to apply some of the principles of one or multiple systems. You have a basis to test if what you're doing in your own system is working. But there is the question of validity. If you're trying to create your system martially, how would you know what you're doing has application? Indeed, would there be any unforeseen risks in adding your own principles or creating a hybrid and using different sources? Like I say, it's possible, and I'll be honest, I have my own personal unarmed system. It's loosely based on Fiore, because that's generally been what I've grown up with. I've done obviously lots of other stuff as well, and that unarmed system works for me, and I've applied it many times when it's mattered. So it's unquestionably been pressure tested. In the very realist sense. But that being said, is it possible with weapons-based martial arts? I still think yes, but again, it has to come from a lot of practice and a lot of research, and with great care, because unless a personal or hybrid approach is really tested, you have to ask whether or not it's credible. And like I say, how do you test it? Duels, first blood, you get my point. Now, there are some individuals within HEMA that do a tremendous job of teaching and researching multiple systems, so much so that they're kind of indiscernible from those who specialise in one system. And someone who sprung to mind when I was writing this is a chap called Dave Rawlings, who's based in London and heads up the London Longsword Academy. A really amazing, great martial artist and HEMA researcher. Now, you could for sure get him and I in a room, and we would absolutely talk about Fiore all day long. And if you were, any onlookers wouldn't necessarily know that it's my main system, but only one of his systems, because he has depth of knowledge and understanding. So researching, and more importantly, embodying the physical traits of those multiple systems, it can be done. It just has to be done in a very intelligent way, and with a really good depth of understanding of those systems over a very long period, in my view, so that it's second nature and the principles of it are second nature. So rambled on a bit, but what do you think? I'm curious to know. As I say, the wind has been taken out of my sails a little bit with this one, because a very similar subject was posted this week. But I'm curious to know people's thoughts, and would love to hear from people as to what they think about this. Can you have a personal system? Can you allow for natural preference while still being true to a system if you're a purist, and so on and so forth? So that's it. Thank you, and until next time.